آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. Please squeeze in to make room for all the people that are coming. Take a step to the left to allow room for people so they can sit. Yeah, I mean, it's the 30th night of Ramadan. We're not done yet. Ramadan's not finished yet. It's only done at the Maghrib of tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow we hear the Maghrib adhan, and that's when it's over. It's not over before that. And it's a reflection of a mistaken understanding of things. If not coming at the 30th night means that somehow you think you've made it, or you did, you took care of your business and you've been accepted. And you have no evidence that you've been accepted. You don't know when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will decide to accept you. You have no idea. So you continue to push till the last minute. You keep on giving your best until Ramadan's over, and then you can say, "Khalas, I have no more opportunity, so I have to stop." In terms of Ramadan, push. But to stop, khalas, the 30th night is 30th, I don't need it. No, of course you need it. I don't know that I've been accepted. Do you? If you have some information, then that's a whole different story. Otherwise, you commit the last night actually more than most scholars. Well, I don't want to say most. That's maybe many scholars, I'll say, in the hundreds. But always say their opinion is that the Laylatul Qadr is the last night of Ramadan. That's how they word it, as the last night of the month. So if it's 29th, then it's 29th, and if it's 30th, then it's 30th. And this is a very well-known, established opinion within Islamic law, that the 30th night of Ramadan it must be treated as any other night of the holy month, with no exception. So just kind of a reminder for everyone to continue to bring your best, pray Taraweeh, pray Tahajjud, push yourself, try to draw yourself closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept your good deeds and grant you that which you hope for and more. Tonight I'm going to do a little bit of a summary. I tried to do this last year and I failed, but this year I set it up a little bit better, so hopefully it'll work out. Just a quick summary of the 12 categories or the 12, sorry, that's from this morning. The 12 clusters of surahs in the Quran. This is how I divide it. This is not wahi. This is not revelation in terms of the division and the breakdown of the groups and what they talk about. This is ijtihad, and anything ijtihadi can be accepted and can be rejected. It's not a problem. I don't claim ownership over it. I don't claim that what I say is correct and what others say is wrong, and I don't believe that there are no other ways to see the surahs in the Quran and understand them either. There's a lot, but this is my this is my reflection on it, and this is my breakdown of the clusters. I found this breakdown beneficial for me in terms of understanding the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and connecting to it and being able to learn from it. And I share it with you to hopefully, inshallah ta'ala, maybe it does something similar to you and helps you kind of also understand and comprehend and draw yourself closer to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that's the point of this month. So the 12 clusters, I'll go through them quickly, and then I'll share with you maybe some final words regarding Ramadan and what the plan is afterwards. I do expect, I'll say this now, I'll say it again later on, I do expect people to show up for Fajr tomorrow morning. I'm looking at Fajr specifically because those who won't, but even if you don't show up, at least listen in during the time. I choose Fajr because that's where people kind of have to, those who are committed will show up for that stuff. Isha is easy, everyone can come for that. Fajr is much more difficult. So I'm putting it in Fajr, the final night, the final morning. There's a barakah in the final Fajr of Ramadan. This is a well-established and well-known tradition within Islamic law and within the Islamic faith, that the final Fajr of Ramadan is a very blessed time. It's a very, very blessed time. So you always want to try and pray Fajr Jama'ah in the last morning of Ramadan and perform your dhikr and dua. And if there's a halqa dars ilm, then you attend that and you subject yourself to that, to those blessings. And that's why I'm choosing, and I'm hoping that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through the barakah of that timing, grants us the reward and the ability to comprehend and understand what we want to talk about. So the 12 clusters of surahs in the Quran start with the longest of them all, by far, the longest of them all, the 10 juz' one. So a third of the Quran, the first cluster is a third of the Quran. The first 10 juz' from Al-Baqarah to At-Tawbah is the first cluster. All the ones after them are much shorter. Some of them can go up to 5.5 juz', 6 juz', but nothing is close to the first one. And the first cluster of surahs tells us the story of the faith, the story of Islam, as in who you are as a person, what your job is, you're a Khalifa, what you're going to use to achieve your job, which is Islam, the methodology, which is the way of life, that's what Al-Baqarah explains, how you're going to maintain it and protect it from different challenges and obstacles, and that's Surah Al-Imran, what value system fuels all of the teachings and all of the rulings and all of that you're going to do, what value system, Surah Al-Nisa, what the obligations are, what the halal and the haram and what you should do and what the do's and don'ts are, what contract you're signing, what buy-in Islam requires in terms of behavior, which is Surah Al-Ma'idah, the individual relationship you have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is Iman, Surah Al-An'am, the communal relationship we have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is decisiveness and lack of oblivion and indifference, which is Surah Al-A'raf, the salvation of the nation, the laws that we're going to adhere to in order for us to prevail, in order for us to be victorious as a nation, Surah Al-Anfal, and then the relationships our nation will have with other nations and other counterparts within or without our group, which is Surah Al-Tawbah. And that's the story of what Islam is going to look like. And that's the first 10 juz, the third of the Quran. The second 2/3 of the Quran will detail some of that stuff. That's how the Quran works. The first 10 juz basically state all of the main parts of what Islam is built upon and what we require. The second 2/3, they detail certain aspects that were not properly detailed. I don't want to say not properly, not fully detailed. Like the surah didn't talk about them. So that's what the second 2/3 of the Quran does. And if you see the Quran that way, you're able to achieve a few things. First is you can always connect surahs in the second 2/3 to that in the first third. They can always make a connection. That these surahs here, this cluster here, is expanding on what was talked about in this early one in the first third of the Quran. Because the first third covers everything. The second 2/3 is just detailing stuff. And you can figure it out and you can make those connections. The same connections that you can make from Al-Mufassal, from Qaf to Al-Nas, to the middle of the Quran. Because from Qaf to An-Nas summarizes everything. So you can make connections from Qaf to An-Nas to the middle of the Quran, and you can take the 2/3 in general and connect them to the first 10 juz of the Quran. And in that fashion, the Quran all becomes, it's like a web. It's a web, it's a network. Everything is interconnected. There's no compartmentalization. There's no silos in the Quran. It all works together. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, فَتُؤْمِنُونَ, right? بِبَعْضِ الْكِتَابِ وَتَكْفُرُونَ بِبَعْضِ. You accept some of the book and reject some of it? No, it doesn't work. No, you can't do that. You have to accept the Quran in its entirety. Every word has to be accepted. You may not be great at practicing every word, but you have to accept it. And you have to be trying to follow it. Like the goal has to be that I'm trying to do my best, and I'm going to keep on improving. Even if I'm not there yet, I might be 50%, 60%, 70%, whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted you. But you can't reject it. You can't decide that this part of the Quran, or this verse, or this teaching, I don't like, or it goes against whatever it is my best interest, or what I think my self-interest is. So that's the first cluster, which is a third of the Quran, which is a lot. And I always tell you, subhanAllah, there's 12 clusters or 12 groups, and yet the first one covers a third of what the Mus'haf is. Everything after it, much shorter. Then they just are connected back to the originals. So the second cluster of surahs in the Quran, from Yunus to Ar-Ra'd, and they're called the Mi'in because they're around 100 verses each, a little bit more, a little bit less. And they cover critical points within the 4 disciplines of life. In life, you have your theology, you have the message that you live by, the ethics that you follow, and the laws that you adhere to. That's basically what humanity requires to function. Within Islam, those 4 disciplines exist as well. Each surah takes one of those and focuses on a critical piece that without it, the faith fails. So the Yunus, within theology, within i'tiqad, it talks a lot about qada and qadar, the hikmah of Allah, the wisdom. If this is not clear to you, then the rest of your aqidah won't do you too well. It won't do you well. It won't do much for you. Because if you don't understand His will, and you don't understand how His will is translated into our world, and what that means for us, then you can believe in Allah and His malaika and His kutub and His rusul and Yawm al-Akhir, but then you're not going to know how actually that's going to affect you. You don't know how to deal with it. So it's very important. And it's an ongoing issue of difference of opinion amongst not just scholars, but of humanity in general, the issue of qada and qadar. Surah Hud talks about the message, and the critical piece of that is reform. We need reform. Islam has to continue to be a reformist faith. It has to be a way of life that identifies challenges and obstacles and problems and corruption, and moves people towards fixing that corruption, depending on their context and kind of where and when they're living. Surah Yunus talks about ethics and behaviors, and it talks about the consistency of these things. They have to be consistent. An ethic that is not consistent is not really an ethic. It's a selective mode of behavior. It's a selective behavior. You want to be kind to this person, not with that person. That's not an ethic. An ethic is consistent across the board. It's the same to everyone. Generosity and chastity, the same thing. That has to be what ethic is. That's what Surah Yusuf teaches. Surah Al-Ra'd, which we had the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowing us to explain it within the weekends of this holy month after Salat al-Fajr, talks about the laws and the critical law of righteousness, of haqq. Haqq in contrast to batil. Surah Yunus has the word haqq in it a lot, by the way. So you may be listening to what I'm saying, say, well, haqq in Surah Yunus, haqq is contrast to dalal. Dalal is aimlessness. Haqq is purposefulness there. Purposefulness is how you understand qada and qadar. That it's not random, meaning it's not unaccounted for. It's not forgotten. No, there's a wisdom in it. So understand what's coming to you and deal with it appropriately. Haqq in Surah Al-Ra'd is contrast to batil. It's righteousness versus falsehood. So they're a bit different. That's the second cluster of surahs in the Quran. The third, from Ibrahim to An-Nahl, it talks about bounties. It's a really beautiful group of surahs. It's probably the easiest one to choose a verse to recite in a salah. If you want to choose, you can they're an ocean of ayat that are just really, really beautiful and easy to memorize and easy to recite. I know some people don't like memorizing Surah An-Nahl, just because they don't understand it, though. If you understood what it's talking about, it's actually not difficult at all. They all talk about bounties, talk about the concept of ni'mah. Concept of ni'mah. Understanding again, what is it that we're receiving in our lives from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How almost everything we receive is a ni'mah. Unless it's ghadab and it's uquba, which very rarely happens. And if it does, it's not identifiable by the naked eye. We can't really see it. But everything else is ni'mah. You need to, number one, be grateful. You have to show thanks. You have to show gratitude. That happens in Surah Ibrahim. Surah Ibrahim starts with in shakartum la'azidannakum. You have to show gratitude. Gratitude is not just oh thank you. No, it's taking what you have and using it appropriately. It's using it. It's serving others with it. That's what gratitude means. So hamd is a piece of gratitude. It's where you say Ya Rabb lak alhamd. I thank you. I am overwhelmed by your blessing. Gratitude is wider than that. It's more than that. It's where you actually take what you've given and you use it appropriately. Surah Al-Hijr talks about acknowledging the ni'mah. Because if you can't acknowledge a blessing, then you can't be thankful towards it. If I don't feel that what I have in my life is a blessing, then how do I thank it? If I don't acknowledge it as a blessing, then it's always going to go under the radar, right? Al-Hijr is about moving all that you have above the radar so you can acknowledge it. And sometimes things that you don't think are blessings, you just miss them, so try not to miss them again. Sometimes something will happen to you and you will feel like it's not a blessing. You'll see it as a difficulty when it is a blessing. You just missed it due to the lack of perspective. The lens were not, the lens needed cleansing. The lens needed cleansing, you couldn't see it. That's what Iblis, he thought Adam min salsalin min hama'in masnoon, this was an issue of this was a reason for his inferiority. It wasn't. It was a reason for his potential. It's the opposite. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, honor Adam because he's made of that. Salsalin min hama'in masnoon. That hardened crust with the rot on the inside. That rot is where life comes from. Have you ever smelled earth that life is coming out of? It stinks. It stinks. Wet mud does not smell nice. I know we see it on the screens and it smells horrible. But that's what life, that's how the origin of life smells like that. True life. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he was talking about the potential of Adam alayhi salam, the life that he had to give, the life that he had inside of him, the potential that he could achieve. So Iblis saw it as this is a reason for him to be inferior. I am from smokeless fire. Min marijin min nar. I come from a very, very pure origin. You're from this mud. It stinks. It's like it's crusty on the outside and it's rotten on the inside. That's why his potential is higher. You weren't able to see the blessing as a blessing. So it misguided him. Ibrahim was told during Surah Al-Hijr, you're going to have a child. He's 90 years old. He's like, what? A child? How is that good news? فَبِمَ تُبَشِّرُونَ. What is this bishara that you're giving me? I'm 90 something, my wife is 90, we're going to have a kid. So then he quickly said, no. وَمَنْ يَقْنَطُ مِنْ رَحْمَةِ رَبِّهِ إِلَّا الضَّالُّ. No, I was wrong. They would give birth to Ishaq, who from Ishaq he would have Yaqub alayhi salam. From Yaqub we have Yusuf alayhi salam. Right? prophets upon prophets upon prophets would descend from Ishaq alayhi salam. All the prophets, the majority, 20 out of the 25 prophets we have in our book are descend from Ishaq alayhi salam. That he didn't want us. For a moment he didn't want him. Imagine how much khair would have been missed. So the Nahl talks about the fact that you have to see the blessing coming from Allah. You have to see it coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's how you identify it, and then you use it according to His law. You have to use it to the way He wants it to be used. It's His, it's not yours. It's His. You have to see it coming from Him, then you have to use it according to His law, or فَخَرَّ عَلَيْهِمُ السَّقْفُ مِنْ فَوْقِهِمْ, as the surah says. Things will collapse. And that's the third cluster of surahs in the Quran. It talks about bounties, be grateful, acknowledge them appropriately, and then remember they're from Allah, so use them according to His law. Those are the three surahs, and they basically detail everything we need to know about bounties. The fourth cluster of surahs, from Isra to An-Naml. This is a longer one. This is definitely a longer one. It's a couple of juz'. I think around 5. I think I did one, I calculated once. I'm probably wrong. This cluster of surahs, it talks about carrying the message. Not to other people, no, but carrying the message in general as an ummah, as a nation. This cluster is very important. How do we carry Islam as a nation? Well, number one, you have to make sure that you understand that you're responsible for it. That's Surah Al-Isra. You're responsible for this message. From now on, it's you as a Muslim. You're the one who carries Tawheed. No one else does. You carry Tawheed, and you're going to carry it through the Quran. That's the book they're going to use. You can't make up some other book and carry the message through some other book. You're going to carry it through the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Kahf tells you what you need. You need to establish a nation. You have to establish a society, a civilization. There are a couple of requirements. You need the idea, you need the wealth, you need the knowledge, you need the power. Without one of those things, you won't establish anything. Read that surah every single week from now until the day you die. Every Friday, sit down and read it before the khutbah, so you're reminded what it is that you're trying to achieve, what it is that you're trying to get for the nation that you're a part of. So Maryam tells us that the unit that will carry the message is the family. So Allah tells us that carrying the message is not means for misery, it's means for uprise. It means for achieving rida, acceptance and solace. And tranquility and serenity, and allows you to stand up against oppression. That's what Surah Taha teaches. Surah Al-Hajj tells us that you need flexibility and you need striving, because this whole thing is a journey. It's a long journey that will require an ongoing effort. Surah Al-Anbiya tells us who our role models are as we carry this message. Surah Al-Mu'minun tells us that in order for you to succeed, you need to invest in the person, in the individual, in the human being. Surah An-Nur tells us in order for your community to carry this message, it has to be an enlightened one. It has to actually adhere by the ethics of this law, or it can't carry this message altogether. Surah Al-Furqan gives us a number of warnings of what will cause us to fail in terms of carrying this message. And Surah Al-Shu'ara tells us that you need the proper narrative. And you have to be able to counter the propaganda that will come against it. And Surah An-Naml tells us that you need balanced power to carry this message, because the strong will never follow the weak. The strong will never follow the weak will follow the strong. So if you want this message to be carried appropriately, you have to be strong. And that's the cluster. That's what these surahs talk about. They point out each and every requirement that we need to think about if we are people who are ummah oriented. If you're ummah oriented, meaning your long-term goal is the status of this nation of Ummah Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, and who those people are. If that's what you're oriented towards, then what you'll come to the conclusion of is that there's a number of things that have to be established in order for us to get there. And that's what Surah Al-Isra to An-Naml explains, which is why it's really important. But it starts out by telling you, first of all, you need to understand that you are responsible. So Al-Isra reminds us, it's you. You're carrying the baton. You're holding on. The flag of Islam, the raya, is in your hand. The Prophet ﷺ is not around. He did not assign someone specifically to carry it. It's you. Which is why that surah is probably the longest amongst them and the most important of understanding. It's a lovely surah. We all love it. Everyone loves to أقيم الصلاة لدلوك الشمس إلى غسق الليل وقرآن الفجر إن قرآن الفجر كان مشهودا. It's just filled with these verses that are iconic, that have memories in our lives. But the purpose of it is to make sure that you know that you're responsible. No one else is. If you're sitting around waiting for someone else to carry this, then you're going to be very disappointed. No one's going to do it. You have to do it. But then if we all felt that way, then collectively we carry it, and then things actually work out. Here are your requirements. You have to have strong families. You have to have a proper understanding. So Taha, you have to have the requirements of Surah Al-Kahf. You know who your role models are. Make sure you invest in people. Make sure that you understand that it's a journey. It's long. It's going to be very tiring. Nothing works out well. Nothing works out well from the first time. There's a lot of problems. There's a lot of struggles. There's always going to be struggles. That communities have to be enlightened to carry this message. We have to work on our communities. We have to increase the Islamic literacy. We have to increase our ethicality and morality. We have to talk about this stuff. We have to discuss why is it that we don't know how to park our cars properly when we come to places. No, we do. This is a reflection of lack of morality. I'm sorry. It's a reflection of poor morals, poor ethics. When you shove your car in someone's life because you want to worship, that means you don't understand how Islam functions and you have poor morals. Like you don't understand that this is harming someone. You don't have the right to harm someone, ever. I don't care what the reason is. Jumu'ah, khatim, your wife's having a kid. Doesn't matter. You're not allowed. And with the fact that we have that problem where we don't feel that way, we're willing to, we do not, that sensitivity, that haya is not a part. We have to talk about that. We have to discuss it. Why is it that we're behaving like this? And we have to start actually pointing out. We have to start holding it. I'm not saying we have to be harsh with one another. I don't believe in harsh. I don't believe that's the right way to go. Like I don't believe in harshness as the method of correcting behavior. No, I believe it happens through conversation, through discussion, through offering advice, through wa'v, through help, through mentorship. That's how you change behavior. You don't change behavior through being harsh. Okay, we're going to tow all the cars that tow. That doesn't work. You just repel people from the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That doesn't mean that we don't address something when it's wrong. We're a wasteful nation. We're wasteful. We're environmentally very unaware. We don't have that feeling. We waste a lot of food. We produce a lot of garbage. We lack that respect for the environment that we live in. Again, I don't believe in harshness in fixing this. It has to come from a mentality of awareness and education. But that's what these surahs explain from Isra to An-Naml. They offer you a bigger picture. You have to be in a lighter community. You have to be aware of things. You have to be cautious of certain pitfalls. Surah Al-Furqan tells you that here's the pitfalls. Here's where you'll fail. Watch out for that. Shu'ara and An-Naml talk about two narratives. You need a clear ideological narrative, and you need a clear authority narrative. Like you need to have these two things established. You have to have your narrative clear. What is it that we believe in? What do we stand for? Is that clear, or is everyone just pulling the everyone's trying to take Islam and say Islam is what I say it is, and not what others have. We're fighting over something that we don't own. And we're fighting over something that we don't have the right to fight over. And we're trying to draw Islam as a picture of being this very narrow line when it's a river, where we can exist within the banks of this river, sometimes in parallel, with not necessarily having the same opinions on a lot of stuff, as long as we agree on the basics that allow us to be within the banks. And that narrative has to be established. So the Shu'ara talks about the fact that you need a strong one, because if you don't have one, then there's propaganda that will ruin you. Shu'ara, media, the poets who can ruin stuff, and that's what the surah teaches. So the Nabi tells us that power, you need to have strength. You need to have strength. So at Naml, I've been trying to push it a little bit, so that when I start doing tafsir of it, you attend, because it's a long cluster. It's a couple of juz'. I think it's really, really valuable to learn it, to really take time and reflect upon the meanings that the surahs carry. And even if you don't do it by attending something here, you do it on your own and you kind of reflect upon these surahs and learn something from them. And these slides are always available. You can always use them as your guidelines if you like. The fifth cluster, from Al-Qasas to As-Sajda, is a very, it's a light cluster. It's not very long. But it talks about relationships. It talks about relationships between people. The relationships you have in your life. There's a number of them that really matter. Number one, the relationship with the people around you, their stories. Be aware, be careful from judging others. Be careful from overestimating, underestimating, or passing judgment on other people. You don't know. You don't know what people are going through. You don't know what their stories are. You don't know much about them. Be helpful or be quiet. Now, be helpful or be quiet. Don't judge people. So Surah Al-Qasas, which is the longest in this cluster, talks about the relationships we have with others. How everything is broken down to the simple stuff. The simple stories seem complex, they're not complex. They're actually very simple, just basic urges. However, you still don't have the ability to judge people and to say that and see something and think that you understand them and you can break them down. And every surah every story in Surah Al-Qasas is one of those, where someone seeing something from afar will misunderstand it. And then when they actually go in and ask the question, like, oh, that's why this is the case. I thought it was, so you learn not to pass judgment, except that it's not, you don't know. You don't know. Surah Al-Ankabut. One more night. Yeah. We're done. We're almost finished. We're almost finished. What is it? How many more hours is it? I'm counting it by the hours, Allah wakilkum, though. No, I'm count by the hour. I'm counting this. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the blessing of this blessed month, inshallah ta'ala. People would, my teachers used to get upset if it turned out 29. They used to cry when it became 29. Like tears would run down their face in sorrow that it was 29, and when it was 30, they would cry in happiness that they had one more night. Had one more night to see if they could make it. One more night to see if they can show Allah their best. One more night to present themselves to God. Maybe He'll choose them as amongst al-utaqa. That was their mentality of it. So alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted us 30 nights of Ramadan. And if we didn't do well in the first 20 nights and you do well, you still have a chance tonight. And if you don't have the chance tonight, you have a chance tomorrow morning at Fajr. If you don't have Fajr, you have al-Dhuhr. If you don't have al-Dhuhr, you have al-Asr. And until the last moment before Maghrib, you still have a chance. If you didn't make it, you can make it. It's not over until it's over. Until Adhan and Maghrib tomorrow, it's not over. So you still have a chance. Wallahi, you could be, someone could spend the whole month doing nothing. Yajtahid tonight and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yaqbaluhu. Wallahi, he puts effort tonight, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept them, and maybe someone who's been strutting in and out all gets rejected for something wrong in their hearts. Never walk into a position where you feel comfortable that, oh, Allah must have accepted me. How do you know? Did He give you, what do you have? You have a stamped, what do you have? I never received anything in the mail. I know I never. If you don't know that you're being accepted, then you work till the last moment. Till the last moment. And that's why this night is just as valuable. A lot of the scholars in the past, by the way, used to say Laylatul Qadr. This is like a well-known, established opinion. Laylatul Qadr is the last night of Ramadan. If 29, then 29. If 30, then 30. They would see because it's the last moment. متى يقبض الأجير حقه أو أجره? When does the employed person get paid? 3-4 days before the end of the month. The end of the month, the last moment, that last night. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the blessing of this night, inshallah ta'ala. Accept us amongst those whom He accepted subhanahu wa ta'ala, if not already done so. Surah Al-Ankabut talks about your relationship with life, the difficulties, the ups and downs of life. It's a relationship. It's a relationship. If you start seeing it that way, wallahi, it changes so much. If you see that the difficulties of life, it's a relationship. It's an ongoing relationship. There's no, I took my quota of hardships, so I'm done. It's an ongoing process. You have to develop a healthy relationship with life and its ups and downs. And that's what, and that is, it comes in the sense, in the form of mujahada and immigration, moving from one situation to the other and striving, which is what Surah Al-Ankabut teaches. Surah Al-Nur talks about relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sunan, with His laws and His rules. It's similar to Surah Al-Ra'd. It explains similar concepts. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put certain laws. If you follow those laws, you'll get where you want to go. If you don't follow those laws, if you go against those laws, you're not going to get anywhere. And so the room talks about our relationship with those laws. If we honor them, then we make it as far as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to make it. If we don't honor them, He's not going to break those laws for us because He made them. This sentiment that we expect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to break all of the laws that He created for us is extremely arrogant. It's extremely arrogant. For Him to create laws, and then you feel like, oh, I'm not going to follow any of those. Just give me what I want without following them. It's very rude. He made those laws, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those laws did not precede Him. These laws that govern the world, you work hard, you get farther, you're united, you're stronger. All these basic laws of existence, these laws did not precede God. They did not precede Him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala precedes them. He made them. They're His laws. He owns them. Newton did not invent gravity. He just discovered it. He just explained it. That's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's law. These are His laws. You honor His laws subhanahu wa ta'ala, you get as far as you can get. You don't honor His laws subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you fail. To actually not honor His laws openly, like means for it to be clear that you're not honoring His laws, you're not actually living by His teachings, and then expect Him to break all of those laws to serve you, it's just not, it's not appropriate. It's not an appropriate mindset. Surah Luqman talks about the relationship between generations, between parents and children, between the generation that's old and the generation that's young. Those are on the way out, those are on the way in, and what that has to look like. and how we have to build that, because without that, there is no hope. There's a certain degree of rahmah and compassion, there's a certain degree of respect, there's a certain degree of service that has to exist within these relationships. Surah Luqman explains it immaculately. And the final surah in this cluster, Surah Al-Sajdah, talks about the relationship you have with God, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. That's why we recite it every Friday at Fajr. Every Friday at Fajr in the first rak'ah you recite Surah Al-Sajdah, or at least a part of it, and you do sujood. Because that relationship is the most important one that you have. But just like every other relationship, if you don't invest in it, it fizzles out. If you don't invest in it, put your heart in it, then it dies off, and it becomes boring, and it becomes habitual. It becomes habitual, and it's taken for granted. It doesn't mean anything anymore. You have to invest in it. And that's the fifth cluster of Surah. Qasas to Sajdah, relationships. Talks about the different relationships you have with people, with life, with Allah's laws, with other generations, and with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are the relationships that you need to think about in your life, the 5 ones that matter. The 6th cluster of surah in the Quran, from Al-Ahzab to Al-Zumar, is a long one, but it's really simple. It talks about ta'ah. That's really all it talks about. It talks about the concept of ta'ah. It's really, really simple. It's really beautiful. We just finished tafsir of it in Arabic on Fridays. We've been doing tafsir of it for 2 years straight, probably, to get through, or a bit more even. And these surahs from Ahzab to Al-Zumar just talk about the concept of ta'ah. It's a big deal to obey Allah. Great. That's the center of, that's the cornerstone of our faith. Excellent. How do you do it? If it's that important, then there should be some explanation regarding it, and that's what these surahs do. Ahzab talks about obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when it's especially hard. When it's especially hard to do so. Whether that difficulty is financial or spiritual or psychological or social or whatever it is. Whatever type of difficulty, when it's especially hard, you have to obey. That's where you show your true colors. That's how you get enlightened. When you prove to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when it's hard, you obey. Everyone can obey when it's easy. Everyone can obey when you can give sadaqah when you have a lot of money. It's easy. Can you do it when you have very little money? Can you do it then? That's Surah Al-Ahzab explains. Surah Al-Sabah talks about the obedience of communities, which is different. The way the obedience of an individual manifests, it looks different than the way the ta'ah or the obedience of a community looks. And Surah Al-Sabah is very unique in that perspective, and there's no other surah like it and that talks about this. And it's really worth time to kind of contemplate it and learn it, because it talks about how does a community obey Allah? Here's what it looks like. It looks a little bit different. The collective looks a little bit different than the individual rhythm. Now, the individual rhythms of ta'ah look a little bit different when they're collective. So its father talks about the fact that you obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through knowledge, not through ignorance. You obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as He wants to be obeyed, not the way you want to do it. I don't get to choose how I obey Allah. It's not my, no, He chooses. He tells me what's obedience, what's not. So I have to have knowledge. I have to understand. I have to know what He's talking about subhanahu wa ta'ala. I have to learn. I have to allow myself to learn from Him subhanahu wa ta'ala appropriately so I can actually obey Him. Surah Yasin tells you that this ta'ah that He's talking about is the way that you attain eternal life. Not just biological life, but life of the spirit, life that matters, life that will continue on forever. The legacy that it leaves and the life that you will find in akhirah, it's life. Ta'atullah is life. It's not death. It's not death. Don't associate the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grimness, and to dark endings. No, it grants you life. And death is not the way. Death is a part of life. It's a transitional piece, in the midst of it. Surah Al-Safat tells you must obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even when you don't know why. Even when you don't have the wisdom, you don't understand the wisdom behind it, or when there's lack of, it's ghaib. He's telling you something is ghaib. You don't know, the malaika, that's ghaib. You had an encounter with the malaika before? No. So it's ghaib to you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, here's what they do, here's who they are, you accept because that's you obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in ghaib, and when you don't understand exactly why He's telling you to do something. This is like a big one for us Muslims in this age, because we've gotten accustomed to shuyukh doing a reasonable job explaining why things should be done, what the purpose, what the benefit is. And I don't disagree with that. I'm actually a big advocate of that being the way you teach Islam. But you have to, parallel to that, teach people that you follow Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's teachings regardless of whether you get it or you don't. It's not a condition. It's not a condition. Never has been. You accept Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you accept Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala whether it makes sense to you or it doesn't. If it makes sense to you, great. If it doesn't, then you accept it anyways, because it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's word. Ibrahim, slaughter your son. All right. Ta'al ya bunay. Aslama. That's the word. فَلَمَّا أَسْلَمَ. When they submitted, when they obeyed. And they submitted. وَتَلَّهُ لِلْجَبِينِ وَنَادَيْنَاهُ أَن يَا إِبْرَاهِيمُ. Surah Sad talks about obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by always returning to haqq. Always accepting. If you made a mistake, you always admit it. All the stories in Surah Sad, really, really easy surah to memorize, to understand. All the surahs are prophets who made mistakes and quickly repented, like instantaneously. And then Iblis. Who I'm sure recognized that he made a mistake at some point during his story. I am certain that at some point in the middle of that story, he figured out that he had, I didn't think this through. But instead of hitting the brakes and quickly repenting and admitting that everything he thought about was wrong and the way he's been living was wrong, he went down the path to the end of it. The end of it, when you make a mistake and you walk down the path, the end, ya akhwani, is Jahannam. All right? When you make a mistake and you decide you're going to go with this mistake till the end, I just let you know that the end is Jahim, is Nar. That's where the end. That's where it ends. And every mistake that you refuse to acknowledge was a mistake and step back and Wallahi tuba alayna wallahi. Wallahi tuba alayna. Be very careful of this. Be very careful of this. It's so easy for us to get into the. It's hard. It's hard to admit when you're wrong, especially if you committed yourself to being wrong for a long time. Especially whatever it is you're wrong at, you've been committed to. Like you spent a lot of years defending. It's hard to go back and say, yeah, that was wrong. But that's what Anbiya do. And they didn't even think about it. The moment it was obvious to them, it was haqq, they quickly repented back. And Iblis did what he did. And the final surah in this cluster is Zumar. It talks about the spiritual or intellectual or mental submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is sincerity. Meaning, how do you mirror submission? All the other surahs talked about submission physically, like the actual actions, the practice. Surah Al-Zumar talks about the spiritual one. How does it mirror inside your heart? It's sincerity. And that is how Tawheed is mirrored inside. Tawheed is the ultimate act of obedience. That's what happens on the Jawarih. Outside, the mirroring of it is projected into the heart as ikhlas, as sincerity. And that's this sixth cluster of surahs. Obey Allah when it's hard. As a community, through knowledge. It grants you life. Do it when you don't understand or it's in ghaib. Do it by always going back to the truth when you make a mistake, and make sure that you do it spiritually through sincerity. And that's what this cluster shares. The seventh is from Ghafir to Al-Ahqaf. It's called the Hawamim. And they offer pieces of advice on the way of da'wah, of carrying this message, not as Isra' to An-Naml talked about, which is as a community to establish it, but rather carrying it to others. Like carrying it to other people and dealing with them and bringing Islam to them. And three surahs give you three positive pieces of advice. Surah Al-Ghafir tells you, take it to those who don't want it, and make sure your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is strong. Don't take it to people if you don't have dua in your heart. Like if you're not making dua, if you're not connected to Allah, don't do it. Make sure you have some connection. Then take it to those who don't want it. Grant them da'wah via your character, so it's fussilat. And then make sure you consult. Make sure that you go back and you work with your group. You collaborate with the people around you. You don't do this alone. You can't work alone in an ummah. You can't work alone. You can't be a part of an ummah and work alone. You can't do that. It's not appropriate. Islam is the group. There's no other group within Islam that needs to exist unless it's going to serve a specific purpose that the rest of us don't have time to invest in. In that case, kudos, amazing. You're going to take on, what are you going to take on? I'm going to take on advocacy. Barakallah feek. Then you have a small group that is going to be focused on just that. Lobbying and educating people politically. That's important. You don't need a group within the group. A group within a group that does everything that Islam does it's a phenomenon. It's a well-established, well-described phenomenon that occurs within large ideologies that leads to those ideologies dividing and collapsing. The group within group phenomenon. It's well described. Sociologists talk about this. They know it. You don't need it. I am Muslim, you're Muslim. We don't need more groups unless the group you're going to build is going to focus on something specific that the rest of us, meaning a fard kifaya. A group has to be for fard kifaya. They're going to carry a fard kifaya on the behalf of the rest of us because we don't want to all be focused on this one thing. That's okay. But a group that's going to do everything, that doesn't work. And you can't do it without collaboration. It has to be amruhum shura baynahum. That's what Surah Shura teaches us. And three warnings. Do not be materialistic in Surah Zukhruf. Do not be delusional or miss the cues or miss the signs of what's coming. Do not be distracted in Surah Dukhan. And do not allow arrogance to enter your heart if you have knowledge. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided you and gave you knowledge, do not let that make you become arrogant and look down on people who don't. Be careful. And Surah Al-Ahqaf, the last surah in this cluster, tells us that regardless of what you do da'wah, let's say you follow all three pieces of advice. The positive, the negative, you do them perfectly. The outcome is controlled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Whether it works out or it doesn't is not you can't control that. That's with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَاذْكُرْ أَخَا عَادٍ إِذْ أَنذَرَ قَوْمَهُ بِالْأَحْقَافِ وَإِذْ صَرَفْنَا إِلَيْكَ نَفَرًا مِنَ الْجِنِّ. Who did everything right? No one listened. The Prophet ﷺ prayed one night and unknowingly the jinn accepted Islam. You don't know how things are going to turn out. Some people, their children will be pious. أولئك الذين تقبلوا عنهم, and some of them والذي قال لوالديه أُفٍّ لكما ولكل درجات مما عملوا. You don't know. You can't control this stuff. You just do your part. You do it to the best of your ability, and then the rest of it is, all of it is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's this last cluster, the seventh cluster. It's three pieces of advice, positive, negative, and then a conclusion at the end of them. And they're called the Hawamim because they all begin with Hamim. I talked about them not too long ago. The eighth cluster is from Muhammad to Al-Hujurat. And this is the cluster of Sayyidina Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam. It talks about him. The first surah is named after him. It tells us your deeds are only as good as they are in adherence to his teachings. The farther your deeds are away from what he taught, the less value they have. The only value for any good thing you do is that if it adheres to what he taught, alayhi salatu wasalam. It's how he lived. You have to do what he did, what he taught, how he taught it, alayhi salatu wasalam. Or there's no your deeds are useless. No matter how long and how much, it doesn't matter. It has to be according to his teachings. Surah Al-Fatih gives us examples of those who adhered to his teachings, those who didn't, and the consequence of both groups. And Surah Al-Hujurat tells us the mannerism of the Prophet ', his manners, his adab, his etiquette, what he lived by, and what we're required to live by regarding each other and regarding him '. And that's his cluster. Three short, beautiful, well-known surahs that tell us things about him '. That are important for us. The final, we're running out of time, so we're done. From Qaf to Al-Hadid to Al-Nas is called Al-Mufassal. Within it, there are four groups. Qaf to Al-Hadid, Al-Mujadala to Tahrim, Mulk to Al-Mursalat, and Naba to Al-Nas. And I talked about those quite a bit over the last couple of days, so they're still hopefully fresh in your mind. But Al-Mufassal summarizes everything that was talked about up till now. Everything that was talked up to this moment was summarized in the last four. That's why if you don't have much Quran inside of you, have the last four juz'. Take it min lihiyati. Take the last four juz'. Know them well. Know them, memorize them, and be able to recite them appropriately. If you're not someone who has the ability to memorize the whole thing, know those. And then move on to Al-Baqarah, Al-Ali Imran, Al-Zahrawan. Then maybe pick up Al-Kahf for yourself. But know these are because they summarize all of the basic values and teachings of Islam, and they're short, and they're easy, and they're summarized, and there's so much information in them that is similar to almost everything that was shared before, without the detail, but with the same degree of profoundness. I'll end with that, inshallah ta'ala. We're going to go for Salat al-Isha tonight. Tonight's a little bit of a treat. Since we finished the khatm yesterday, the sunnah is always, whenever you do a khatma, the sunnah, just in case you don't know this, if you're reading the Quran, the sunnah is when you finish Surah Al-Nas, you turn over, you recite Surah Al-Fatiha, and the first 5 verses of Surah Al-Baqarah. And then you stop and make dua. That's the sunnah if you're reciting the Quran verbally in a majlis without prayer. Or if you're doing an ijazah to a shaykh. If I'm reciting to my shaykh, once I'm done Surah Al-Nas, I go back, I do Fatiha, and I do Al-Baqarah. Why? It's an indication that you will read again and again, that this doesn't end. You can keep on doing it. So since we can't do that in Salah, I can't just start, we can't recite Surah Al-Nas and then start all over again with Al-Baqarah. What we're going to do is today we're going to start with Surah Al-Baqarah and read a couple of verses. It will be short 8 rak'at, followed by 3 witr, so it'll be a bit shorter than what we have usually. And here's the catch. The qira'ah tonight is going to be warsh. All of the qira'ah in Isha and the Taraweeh is going to be qira'at warsh an Nafi'. So we recite Hafs an Asim min tariq al-Shatibiyya, and sometimes min tariq al-Tayyibah, at least I do min tariq al-Tayyibah, and those who do Qasr al-Mufassal, the same thing. So Hafs an Asim is the name of our recitation. There are other reciters. There are 10 other reciters with those who are the narrators from them. So Warsh an Nafi' is a recitation. And today, Jazakallah khair, Shaykh Ma'an and Brother Abdul Rahman Wada and Abdul Rahman Saidam have agreed to lead the prayer with Warsh. Then we'll pray Shafi' and Witr normally as Hafs, with the regular Salah, and we'll have our dua, inshallah ta'ala. So if you're hearing the Fatiha sounds a little bit different, or you're following on Surah Al-Baqarah and it sounds a little bit different, enjoy. Warsh is a beautiful qira'ah, and it's very, very enjoyable because it just has way more mudud. So this is for you to, inshallah, hear a different qira'ah and hopefully enjoy hearing the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a little bit of a different manner. So just so you're not surprised or starstruck. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أنا بحطه